The Taliban has officially declared victory in Afghanistan after all U.S. troops left the country and ended America's longest war. Taliban fighters celebrated the announcement in Kabul last night. America's exit marks an end to the 20 years of war and bloodshed in Afghanistan, but there are growing fears and uncertainty among many Afghans still living there as the Taliban take charge. For more on this, let's bring in Ian Bremmer. He's the president of the Eurasia Group and GZERO Media. Ian, it's good to see you on such a somber day. Now with the United States out of Afghanistan, help us understand for those folks who say, or who are wondering if we are back to where we started all those years ago. Are we back at that point?
No, we're not, in the sense that, remember, the purpose of the war initially, a scared and angry America wanted to ensure that we destroyed al-Qaeda, that we killed Osama bin Laden or brought him to justice. Indeed, that has occurred. And the ability of terrorist organizations to attack the American homeland or assets abroad has indeed been degraded very substantially. But if you ask me, 20 years, thousands of American servicemen and women, lives lost, $2 trillion, have we gotten return for that investment? The answer is clearly no. And I think that's one of the reasons why, no matter how you feel the evacuation was handled or mishandled, the popularity of ending this war, and even ending this war in ignominy with the Taliban taking over, is still quite high among Democrats, Republicans, and independents in the United States today.
So we're not back where we were 20 years ago, but I can't help but to think, particularly after seeing that ISIS-K attack, that is there a possibility that, I don't know, 5, 10 years from now, we could be back there? You know, the Taliban may be in charge now, but their ability to maintain security and safety in Afghanistan, I think, is called into question. Vlad, earlier in the show, you brought up, you know, the Haqqani network, you brought up al-Qaeda. There are other entities out there. And I think that my fear, and I don't know very much about it, you're our expert here, is that there's a possibility of a power vacuum moving forward that will then end us up where we were 20 years ago.
Well, again, let's keep in mind that 20 years ago, we were describing Afghanistan as almost an existential threat. We had just come off of 9/11. We ended up with over 100,000 troops on the ground. There is no way that we are going to be back there. If you ask me, will the United States be engaged in further drone strikes and bombing and intelligence gathering on the ground in Afghanistan over time? The answer to that is almost certainly yes. But that's a very different story from, are we going to go back to war on the ground in Afghanistan? And that's what the Americans wanted an end to. And let's face it, I mean, some of this is, we describe this as a forever war, but the war that we've been fighting over the last year, 2 years, with no American troops losing their lives, Americans staying on bases, very small footprint, the Afghan Defense Forces doing most of the fighting, that's radically different from the war that we had been fighting over the course of the Bush administration and even much of the Obama administration. So we are talking a bit about apples and oranges here. Also keep in mind that one of the ways that we are not back to where we were 20 years ago is that the American alliance, the coalition, is weaker and more divided than it was after 9/11. After 9/11, we asked our allies to come with us in this war, and they all joined. And did so without any question, sacrificing their own young men and women. That would be very tough to do today. And I do think that the fact is that Afghanistan represents much more of a refugee threat, a Islamic radicalism threat, even an extant geopolitical and security threat to our allies in Europe than it does to the United States. And yet we decided to pull out by ourselves and didn't ask the allies for their inputs there. That's also very different than where we were 20 years ago.
So, Ian, let me ask you, what America's role is in the world today. You know, as a former foreign correspondent who reported from a lot of places that did not register at all on the radars of people in this country, not because people don't care, but just because it's just the way it is in the news cycle. People tend to be inward looking, and in this country, we can agree, I think, that we've become more inward looking, more isolationist, and yet, all of a sudden, throughout the course of this evacuation, Afghanistan has become the driving story of the news cycle, when for many years it was hard to get Afghanistan on the front pages of any newspapers unless an American soldier or sailor or Marine or airman was killed. So what are our interests now around the world, and how do you see America's global presence, and what should it be now?
Well, before, the course of the Cold War and after the Cold War, so much of America's role in the world was driven by its military capabilities, by bases all over the world and soldiers all over the world and nuclear capabilities and intelligence capabilities and all of that. And one of the reasons why we end up spending $2 trillion in Afghanistan was because we saw it primarily through a military and warfighting lens, as opposed to a grassroots, nation-building, human rights type lens. I mean, if Canada had been in Afghanistan with American-type power, the intervention would have looked very different. And I think that is a challenge. There's no question that if you are an Asian ally of the United States, you still see the United States through a very strongly military lens. U.S. troops on the ground in Japan, in South Korea, the freedom of navigation and operations movements that we do, exercises through the South China Sea, in the Straits of Taiwan. That is the way they perceive the United States. But America and the average American no longer wants to see the U.S. in that way globally. We're the most powerful country in the world, and we have the reserve currency, and we have the big tech companies and the banks. But increasingly, it's not isolationism, Vladimir, but it is unilateralism. It is much more transactional. It's what are we getting out of this trade relationship, military alliance? Why are we there? And the Asian allies will see us as much more compelling, in part because the United States all agrees that China is the principal American threat. But for Afghanistan, which is at best a third-order interest of the United States, and frankly wasn't even really a first-order interest even after 9/11, if we're being honest with ourselves, that's a much harder kind of argument for a politician to make if they're looking at domestic politics.
And can other countries trust the United States? I mean, the question that I have is, do you throw your lot into with the U.S. if you look at what's happened in Afghanistan over the course of the 20 years, which is a long time? I mean, let's not, it absolutely is a long time. What was most heartbreaking about that terrorist attack outside of the Kabul airport was to know that there were some soldiers, sailors, Marines that were killed who were just babies when 9/11 happened. That was absolutely heartbreaking. But if you are another country who is struggling with democracy, who is dealing with perhaps an insurgency, rebellion, and the United States says we want to be a partner in fomenting democracy in your country, do you take us up on that offer?
The answer is you probably hedge more than you used to for a number of reasons. Number one, because the Chinese are out there as the second largest economy in the world, and they're spending a lot in the ground in a lot of the poorer and middle income economies that historically your choices were much more limited. Secondly, you're right. There are a lot of American allies that saw Trump as an aberration, this America First policy. They were scared by him. They didn't like him particularly. That's true for most allies. But once Trump was gone, they're like, okay, now we can go back and we can trust the American relationship more. And what Biden did on Afghanistan and the way he did it, more than what he did, I think has shaken the confidence of a lot of American allies that this is a more structural change in the United States. It's not about who the president is. But you can take that argument too far as well, for two reasons. The first is that the United States is still by far the most powerful country out there. And even if you don't trust the Americans quite as much, you still want to have access to that economic power, that military power. It matters to you. Secondarily, as much as the United States doesn't really know what it stands for, the way we did when the Berlin Wall fell, the way we did, frankly, after 9/11, still, if you're comparing American values to Chinese values as a nascent democracy with weak institutions, you may not love the United States, and the choice may be more challenging for you, but you still can't compare it to the kind of authoritarianism, rejection of individual and human rights, lack of rule of law, civil society, that is reflected by the Chinese Communist Party and government today. And I think it's important for us not to reject that reality, even when we've had a very tough couple of weeks here, by the way.
Ian, I want to pivot back to Afghanistan, and you brought up China, and what we've seen sort of in the last few weeks is the Chinese foreign minister posing with leader of the Taliban, the Chinese advising America as to how to deal with the Taliban moving forward. I'm curious as to, how you think other countries should handle the Taliban. They are going to have to form a government now. The U.S. had been negotiating with the Taliban prior to this for some sort of peaceful transition, essentially, treating them like a legitimate governmental alternative. But moving forward, I don't think the U.S. is going to be having a diplomatic relationship, or at least we won't have an embassy there. So, how do global players deal with the Taliban moving forward?
Well, you are going to engage. The success of the evacuation, 122,000 Afghan civilians gotten out of Afghanistan and the Kabul Hamid Karzai International Airport, as well as thousands of American citizens, that doesn't happen unless the Taliban play ball with the United States. That doesn't mean we like them. That doesn't mean we trust them. But we have to understand that reality. And sanctioning the Taliban is not likely to be very effective. These are not the kind of leaders who are interested in buying luxury real estate in New York. Putting sanctions on them and freezing their bank accounts doesn't accomplish very much. What you end up doing is hurting the Afghan people from crushing the Afghan economy worse than it already is. So I think that, for the players, and we have to recognize, the U.S. is not going to have a dominant role in Afghanistan going forward. That is by choice. The countries that will be the countries in the region that care the most, who have the most at stake. These are countries that the United States doesn't have a great relationship with: China, Iran, Pakistan, Russia. Think about those four countries that have the most at stake in Afghanistan, and the United States has, at best, deeply problematic relations with all four of them. But all of them will have reasons that they will want Afghanistan to be stable. All of them will not want to see Islamic extremism expand out of Afghanistan and be tolerated inside of Afghanistan. None of them want to see big refugees streaming out of the country. So the United States and our coalition partners that fought side by side with us in Afghanistan actually share a lot of interests with the countries that are surrounding Afghanistan. And I thought that Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi calling for an emergency G20 meeting, which will allow for the democracies to talk together with the countries that have much more at stake, that's the right way forward. It's not easy. There's not a lot of trust. There's not a lot of coordination. But, it's kind of like climate change. Whether or not you like all the other countries in the world, if you don't work with the countries that are relevant, you will get nowhere. And that's kind of where we're going to be in Afghanistan going forward.
That is fascinating. Ian Bremmer, thank you so much. Great having you.
Sure.